Uh, Good morning, everyone. I hope it's not too late for the noon. So I will start with the introduction about myself. So I am Ashan Fernando. Hope you all know my name by now, and I'm working as a software architect at 9S Technology. And I'm really happy to say and privileged that to see and work with a lot of smart engineers every day, where I solve most of the business problems using technology. And a little bit about me in detail. So I'm a tech blogger. Probably if you go to Medium, you have already seen some of my articles. And then I contribute to open source, where I'm quite proud of starting this serverless DynamoDB local plugin about 5 years ago. And also start contributing to frequently contributing to Stack Overflow for AWS. So that's kind of brief about myself. So I'll directly jump into the topic from now. So to start with, so let me give a very brief about microservices. And I think I don't need to go in detail because you must already have heard of microservices and the use cases. But just to give a very brief that for anyone who's new, so we are basically talking about architectural style where we design software application as a collection of independently deployable services. And of course, there's a lot of other details around it, like how we separate the services based on business domain, different characteristics, DevOps, and so on. So I'll just keep the detail out, but that's just the basic idea of microservices. And the key motivation around microservices, as you have already heard from the other speakers as well, that businesses need to innovate faster. There's no doubt about it, because now we are in a world where software changes so many lives, and the same time the competition also comes in, where it's very obvious that having a very large application with a lot of code getting into one testing that before doing a release, it's not a practical thing. So we need to go for something kind of smaller units that works together, where we can do individual units faster. So that's kind of the basic motivation to go for microservices. But of course, it's easier said than done. To give a word of caution, so today I'm not going to promote microservices for anyone. So my basic idea of this session is to give you the insight if you are going ahead with microservices, the tools that you can get with AWS and so on. And also it's very important to emphasize this fact, because microservices isn't a silver bullet to solve a lot of our problems. And I do repeat this because it's not for everyone. And while working with more than 20 software products, I've seen only very few cases that fit in to the criteria of microservices in my career. So I would like to take a time here to say that be very careful when you adapt a new architectural style, whether you have the right skill set, the people, and the practices around the organization to adapt it. And of course, if you are already into microservices, or if you are planning to go to microservices, breaking your large application, then it's very important that you do the right steps in the path. So before going into detail, so I will take a small example of a microservice and to give you a basic idea. So if you look at online, let's say online store web application, we can design it in a way like these three microservices you can see here. So basically we have an inventory service, we have account service, and we have a shipping service. So for example, if someone goes to the website and try to purchase the item, it will go to shopping cart, and then you can place the order. Then it will go to the relevant microservice, where it will also communicate with the other, saying that the order is now confirmed, you can ship the things, and so on. So what I want to emphasize here, it's not that you can just build microservices, you need ecosystem around it. For example, you need gateways. If you have a mobile app, you probably need a API gateway to communicate with the mobile app. And even inside the microservice, you might need some middleware, maybe micro gateways as the front point that communicate with other, and even for internal communications across microservices, you might need an event bus or any other means of messaging to make it work. So the idea is basically, it's not that you just can break things into microservices, but you also need ecosystem around it. And you need to basically facilitate that, and it's not that simple. So let me show you a few points that where the microservices could become a challenge. And I think, as I shown you before, when we go into the realm of microservices, we are actually talking about distributed systems where we need to manage multiple services separately. They manage the middleware, where we might need to run them in a fault tolerant, reliable manner, and also development tools and support. It's not that it's all sorted. So we need to find right practices to make people productive when developing applications, especially in the distributed systems. And then doing transactions, it's tough. If you really go into these details, it's you will find a lot of other complexities that involve. So you might even wonder, how can we do things faster with this overhead? And it's really fact that before anyone moves to microservices, it's good to analyze whether your case is right and then jump into it. So so let's see whether we have at least some hope with the AWS stack to ease our burden. So so that's why I want to introduce the AWS serverless stack. And I think from the previous speakers, you already have heard quite positive things about AWS serverless. But in here, what I want to clearly emphasize is that there are direct use cases of the AWS serverless stack if you are designing microservices. So I will touch some of the important areas where how the AWS serverless stack will help. And for anyone new to AWS serverless stack, so I will just give some brief overview about what is serverless first for anyone who just joined this session. So basically, when we talk about serverless, we are talking about ways of doing things where most of the overhead is taken by the cloud. Where we, for example, if we run code in AWS, if we have heard the service called AWS Lambda functions, we can run our code, we can deploy our code, but we don't need to deal with all the other complexities behind how to scale them, how to provision another instance, and even how to manage the availability and fault runs of these executions, because it's managed by the platform. And we basically pay for the use and pay for the value. So that's a typical example of a serverless service in AWS. So let me go into detail where we will actually benefit when using AWS serverless, in particular to microservices. So I have listed about 5 points that will help you to kind of give an idea where it will fit in. And if you are doing microservices, if you are actually trying to break your monolith into microservices, this will be, I hope this will be quite useful, where you can think along the line. So at first, I will first go directly into the full stack serverless microservices. I think Austin already have covered some of these points, but let me quickly give you an overview. So if we look at the example that I've shown for the online store, we can model that entire microservice architecture using serverless. So this is a good example for that, where each service is built with Amazon API Gateway, Lambda, and DynamoDB. And of course, the communication is handled through Amazon Event Bridge, which acts as the event bus here. And the web application can be built with CloudFront to serve the front-end artifacts, where we saw them in S3. So some of these services might be new to you, but what I want to give you is the understanding that we can build this with serverless entirely. And the important fact here, although you see more services per each microservice, you really need to manage your code. You can actually work on the code that you add to each microservice, while rest of the things can be managed by the managed by the platform. So it's more of a huge time saver. And specifically, if we take even the event bridge, if you try to provision, let's say, a Kafka cluster, you might need to deal with a lot of other things, like how to provision its storage, its load balancing, and then monitoring part of it, where things are more or less managed by the cloud itself. So this will ease up a lot of burden when we go with serverless stack for microservices. And going into the next point, the serverless DevOps tools. So probably you have heard from the previous session about the serverless framework. And you can also see that there are other ways of doing DevOps or provisioning the serverless services in cloud. So classic example, if your team is quite familiar with writing code or scripting, you can go into and select a tool like AWS CDK, the cloud development kit, where you can write the infrastructure in code using maybe TypeScript or another preferred language. Or even if your team is more into configuration, or you have a skill set with people that are having this automation skills, they could actually go into AWS SAM or select a framework like Terraform to provision these serverless services. And the important point here is that all of these services, like even if we take the classic example of Amazon API Gateway, there are a lot of things internally which we need to configure. But when we use these tools, they are highly opinionated, where they will give the default parameters, where if you need some change only, you need to override it. So you can write the infrastructure in code in very few lines, rather setting up all the things up front. So it will fall back into the default configuration when provisioning. So for example, if I go to the third party plugin serverless framework, it's just few lines of code that you need to write. Again, same with the AWS CDK, where it will provision the AWS API management, then the Lambdas and so on. So moving to the other point, so this is something we really actually see the value, because we have this AWS Lambda as a kind of the integrator across different services. But in reality, that's something that you can actually avoid if you see a clear codeless integration. So what I mean by codeless integration is basically, let's say you want to do something like storing the user activity in your database, in your online shopping application. Basically, you might not even need a Lambda function in between. Maybe you can plug the Amazon API Gateway directly into your Amazon DynamoDB, where it will be stored or track the user activities. Or if you need to process them for analytics, you can stream the API Gateway, the request that comes in to maybe Amazon Kinesis and get it done. And only for processing, you can use Lambdas. But as I mentioned, the power of Lambda actually hides these capabilities, which lies in the AWS platform. So my advice here is, when you're doing microservices, you might actually come across these use cases where you could actually skip using Lambdas, but do direct integrations across these services. Right. So going into the next point. So when talking about the microservices, we definitely need micro middleware, and I will take some time here to give you some insight how convenient these services are and how practical they are to use in microservices. Because you might wonder, when setting up a microservice, if we need to set up an API gateway, typically something comes to any one of your mind is basically, isn't it costly, right? Isn't it too big to put inside a microservice? So the fact here is, although the AWS API gateway comes with this, for example, if I take the API gateway, although it comes with this features, the way that you provision them inside your application is quite straightforward. For example, it's matter of simple configuration to set up an API gateway, as I explained in the previous slides about DevOps. On the other hand, for operating it, it's actually the same. For example, if we have an API gateway where we need to pay, let's say, few $100 just to provision it, it doesn't work like a micro gateway, at least in my head, because then you have to take the decision, maybe can't we centralize it rather using it per microservice, because it's costly, right? So, but because in AWS we pay for the use, we can actually provision it inside the microservice, where we only pay for the use. Like for example, I just shown in the diagram, we might actually get charged only for the number of API requests and connection minutes, where we could even have maybe 10 API gateway provision per microservice. So that's the advantage that I'm talking about, where we have as architects, we have the luxury of putting and taking decisions where we want to put right things in place. So that's where the beauty of AWS serverless stack comes in. The same goes to other services as well. For instance, if you look at AWS Lambda, we are basically paying for the number of executions and the execution time. So it's a choice of how many Lambdas that we need. So rather we dwell on whether what will it be big enough, or will we having enough capacity to put a Lambda, because since we pay for the use, we have that option. And that same goes to the other services like Amazon DynamoDB, where we pay for the IOPS, or the number of inputs and outputs that comes to the database, and for the record size. So you can clearly see that since these payments, the cost model, also go with usage, we have that luxury in putting them as micro middleware inside our microservices. And in fact, that was the main reason I actually see the value of the serverless stack when it comes to microservices. So moving into the fifth point. So this is something I also want to cover in a bit of detail. So when we build microservices, we need different ways of communication. For instance, you might need external communication, where you have the need of having an API gateway, where you receive the message and then forward it to the compute or other processing. But similarly, we also need internal communication. For example, even within a microservice, you might maybe need to do different things like storing the data, as well as maybe taking a snapshot of an image and putting the metadata into a database at once. And you need to ensure that the fault tolerant aspect is there, even if something happens in a, let's say, when accessing the S3, still it needs to maybe retry, or the same happens when we are storing something in the database. We might need to ensure that even with any partial failures, we can update the data. So that's where we need these middlewares for internal messaging. For example, if you are doing microservices with AWS for internal PubSub messaging, you can use Amazon SNS service. And at the same time, if you want to do a microservice cross communication asynchronously, you can use the Amazon Event Bridge. So the beauty of this platform is that you have the right tool set where you can use them appropriately. In the past, for example, before Amazon Event Bridge is there, we had to stick with Amazon SNS to do cross service communication. But now it has become more of a kind of a hub and more convenient, where we have all the communication, message filtering at one place. So that's why you actually have to, if you are building microservices with serverless, you have to see and know about the tools available in AWS platform. So let me go to another point with the tools. This is something definitely you will come across when handling transactions. So especially when we go to microservices, this is one of the toughest challenges that I personally encountered, because in a monolith application, it's quite easy, right? Because we can create a transaction block, and with the database, we can do multiple operations, and we know that if something happens, something wrong happens in between, we can roll back, which is quite straightforward. Now, when it comes to microservices, the same simplicity is not there. So, for example, let's say if I want to, if I purchase the item in my online store example, I might need to first check the inventory, get the item, and then place a record against the user, and then even talk to the inventory service that not even the inventory service, the supply service to do make a record to supply that item that is bought in the online store. So this requires different a transaction across different services. Of course, you could tell that it's more of communication, but it's also a transaction in a way, because if something goes wrong in between, we need to roll back, right? Because if the supply process fails, we might need to either retry, or if even there's some issue with the payment or something, then we might need to roll back or compensate the transaction. And this is quite costly across microservices. So of course, there are well-known patterns to handle this, like the Saga pattern, where we can model the cross microservice transactions as set of local transactions and across communication. But then doing it without the serverless stack, you probably need to set up an event bus separately, which is again an overhead. But with AWS serverless stack, you get the tools like AWS step functions. If you want to do a transaction that takes maybe needs some offline verifications, or use again the Amazon Event Bridge to do this compensating transaction if something goes wrong. So you can set up the architecture as you want, and the overheads with this middleware actually almost comes to a very minimal cost for you. So with that, I would like to discuss about the key takeaway points of this presentation. So I would like to again reiterate, microservices aren't for everyone, because this is one of the my key learnings in my career, because when building multiple software products, there was situations where we started in microservices, but we learned it the hard way that it actually costs more, especially for startups, because building microservices with startups, although we need that agility in the future, sometimes that might actually hinder the go-to-market, which is the priority of a startup. So similarly, there are a lot of other cases where it could actually go wrong. And when moving to microservices, I would say if you can't manage your monolith with maybe a higher degree of quality code, or with skilled developers for doing DevOps, then microservices won't be silver bullet, because the same problems will come with a kind of amplification when we move to microservices. So if you are moving to microservices, just ensure that you have the right skill set with people, actual people who has learned microservices, who has even failed with doing some, because that's the part of the learning. And rather just jump into microservices looking at the technology. Technology is available, and that technology mindset. So my advice is, it's good to assess the current situation and see really, is there a use case for me to go into microservices at first. And of course, if you are going into microservices, if the platform is set and you see the value, maybe because your application is so large, and you can see clearly when breaking it to different small parts, you can reap the benefit of releasing them more rapidly. Then, of course, serverless is a candidate. And I would say I could actually recommend, because it will reduce a lot of the overheads from you, and especially if you use it properly. And again, there's a place that you should avoid, where you will take the technology first approach, where again, I learned it in a hard way, where we have a lot of tools in the AWS cloud, sometimes you might need, you might even not need some of those, because you don't need that complexity. So in those cases, it's very important that you don't take the technology first approach. Rather, you look at the quality attributes in your application on the architecture and then select the right tools. So that is very important. Then the other key takeaways, basically in AWS, as I shown you with 5 important points, there's tons of services available, and especially to support microservices. And these services not only help you to build a kind of a robust environment, but also it will save cost, save long-term effort, and it will also give more benefit to evolve your architecture. And as I explained in the previous example, that before the event bridge, I had to work with AWS SNS for cross microservice communication. And that also brings a very important point where even a serverless architecture, you can actually evolve with the innovation comes with the cloud. And as you are quite aware, cloud is not the same in a year's time, right? Things are actually changing. So you also need to adapt your microservices strategy and even certain things in your architecture along with it, because it will actually save you in terms of cost as well as operational effort and overheads to reduce them. So with this, actually, I'm coming to the end of my presentation. Any questions so far? So let me go into the questions and see whether there are any questions. So I think so far there's no questions. Like, so what we can do is, if you have any questions that came up, because I was just going through some of the new areas and key areas that you can use for microservices. If you have any questions, probably you can post a message later on, or contact me directly with my details. Probably I will share the details later on after the presentation. And then maybe I will just wait about 1 minute to see whether if there are any other questions, and then we can go to the next step. So there's one question. So so I will first speak out the question. So the question is from Devon Vijay Singh. The question is about what would be the best way to share code across serverless services apart from package modules in a microservice architecture. Okay, so this is a very interesting question. So with microservices, one of the objectives are basically to have very least dependencies across microservice itself, because when we have things to share, it itself could become bottleneck for each microservice team to move forward, because then we depend on one thing where it becomes a challenge. But then again, if you have a very demanding need to maybe share a common business logic across microservices, of course, you can go for based on your programming language, go for libraries where you could publish certain code blocks into libraries. But I'm not encouraging that, because that itself has drawbacks, where the ownership of these libraries might actually be tough, especially if these libraries contain business logic. If they are utilities, that's fine, because it's more like you use a third-party library in your code. So that's just one way of sharing anything in between, any code between microservices. So as I mentioned, I highly discourage. If there's any solid case, you can go for libraries. Again, not recommended for business logic, but anything that goes to utilities or any other cross-cutting concern, that's fine. So I'll go to the next question. So the second question is, what is the main advantage of microservice over monolith? So as I explained before, and also just to add it to it, as I mentioned, microservice is not for everyone. So if your application is large enough and you feel the limitations of the application with the monolith architecture, like you have large teams working in the same code base, but before releasing something, they need to test it thoroughly. Of course, there could be automation, but since you do a change, it might affect some other areas where the boundaries are not that clear. So if you have some of these problems, or you feel that the monolith architecture actually taking you back, going to market fast, then you can actually look into microservices where you can reap the benefits of the agility. Because now when we break things into smaller pieces, you already understand that it's easy to understand what is the boundary, and also do the changes at the phase that you need. But so that actually motivates going for the microservices. So I would say that's the main motive, to be more agile, to do rapid releases, to even help the developers to understand the boundary, which is a smaller one, where they can perform better and test better. So those are the main reasons to go with microservices. But as I mentioned before, it's not for everyone. Just be cautious about your application and see whether it's viable. And then the next question is, when will you know that it's best to move into microservice architecture? So that's a very interesting question. Basically, it's quite tough in these situations, because I know microservices, since there's a hype, especially even the business people, they promote, like they request, why don't you go for microservice? And maybe your project manager asks, why do you still, maybe you want to build a new application from scratch. They might ask, why not go to microservices? Because you don't want to end up with building a monolith and then later spending that effort to convert it to microservices. So that's a common question that I also see from people. The challenging part here is that things doesn't work that way. Sometimes building the monolith, for example, for a startup, building the monolith without having any overheads of distributed systems is the best way, could be the best way, because that way you could go to market, win the business, like succeed in the business. Then after some time, you can actually see whether, assess the problems with your existing architecture and see whether is it reasonable to go for another different architectural style like microservice. So when you do it, it's actually depend on the business, but rather just being generic, what I would say is you should actually have solid reasons to move to microservices, not the other way around. Don't just jump into microservices, because it will also add up a lot of other overheads that could impact the business. And even I have these experiences where we started microservices, but we clearly see it's too early to do it. So we switch back where we could, because the real benefits you could gain with microservice comes when the system is large enough. Or you see in an enterprise, you can clearly define the boundaries. And the real challenges are not only the technology, it's actually with people and the communication between different teams and so on, that also adapt to the complexity. So right place and right time, probably looking at your project, you have to decide. But as a rule of thumb for startups, I would say be very cautious before jumping into microservices. If you are starting a new project, again, be very cautious and see whether you have a solid case, whether you know the boundaries. And when I say the boundaries, it's not that you can just break the domain into, let's say, accounting and the shipping, supply chain, and so on. It's not that you can just divide by the domain. Maybe based on your business, there could be connections between these boundaries. So when you break, it's like you build something around it where you don't have that connection. So things could get ugly. So be very careful when you go into microservices unless you know these things. And typically, application, if you are architect in the application, leading that project, you might learn that after some time, that you get to know the boundaries, real boundaries in the system, in terms of team interactions, in terms of communication, and so on. So that's where I think you should move into microservices mostly. And there are a few more questions. I will let me check my time. I think I have a few more minutes, so I will go into those questions as well. So the other question is, it's about that was for someone who's new to AWS. How could we learn these services? There are like different ways of getting to know and getting familiar with these services. Even before going to microservices, like even before you design application, the best way is you have to dive into the water. You have to try it out. So of course, there are quite good learning material out there where you could either follow a certification where you will cover these areas to learn these services, but also what I would highly recommend is you have to jump into doing things. So either you can join to an open source project where you could contribute, or try it at your workplace, maybe as a proof of concept to learn. So without that, it will be very hard, because you have to actually feel how these things works. Even now, when I see a new service, I actually go there and then try it out, because otherwise you don't get that, build that confidence what it does in AWS. Then going to the another question, whether microservices technical support fee. I'm not fully getting that question. Maybe I will. So if that question is in terms of support from the cloud provider, so I would actually disconnect that from microservices, because the cloud provider has its own support model where you could have free support for certain things, but of course there's a paid plan for different level of support in AWS, so that you can subscribe to. So I'm not sure whether I have answered that question, because that's the way I understood the question. So if it's different, probably you can put another question there later. I could report back. Then going into the other question, are there any strategies to avoid coupling our application with cloud providers? Of course, there are strategies. You could use, if you are doing microservices, but you want to be vendor neutral, you can use Kubernetes or any other orchestration with Docker. The fact is, these things are possible, but it also comes with a cost, because now you have that luxury of moving across cloud providers, so running things on-prem as well as in cloud. But itself, as I mentioned, in like as kind of what serverless solves, you have to do certain things by your own. So that's the cost that comes up with this. And of course, there are ways of doing things vendor neutral, or the cloud vendor neutral. Then the other question is, what are the AWS services provide for Dockerized microservices communication? Of course, even for the containers, if you are looking at having the communication inside the orchestration or the container with using containers, again, like without using AWS tools, then you have to find the containers or the software you need and run them as containers. But if you are free to use AWS infrastructure, like you don't have any kind of concerns in terms of vendor locking, probably you can go with the services that I've shown you. It's like these services you can even consume by containers. For example, if you want to connect one container to send PubSub messages to another, you can use SNS. That's a possibility. Or else you need to find the right tools. Maybe you need to run a containerized Kafka for event communication, or maybe RabbitMQ for another purpose. Like so, likewise. Then what's the database architecture in microservice applications? So that's the other question. And this is again a very tough question. So I tend to work with some teams who tell that they are doing microservices, but they use one database. Of course, it's very hard to like. I see a clear problem when people break microservices but use a single database, because database itself becomes the the bottleneck for the teams to do work independently, or at least with minimal dependence. So the ideal, I would say, is to have separate databases per a database per microservice. But if you don't have that luxury, you can consider maybe separating schemas, or at least have that governance, or at least have that separation, that things are not added ad hoc to the database, which will affect the other microservice team. So the best case, I would say, each microservice is self-contained with its own data store. But if there are limitations, probably you can go for other ways of doing it. But it's again could be limited, where you will limit the benefits of microservices. Then let me go to the other question. What are the best practices to design microservices? Okay, so this is quite a broader topic. I think there are a lot of best practices out there to build microservices, but one point I want to point here. First, see whether the use cases applies to you, because you can find to do transaction, there are well-defined patterns like Saga. If you want to do cross-cutting concerns, there's Sidecar. There are different patterns to solve each of these problems. But again, the challenge is sometimes you might not even need to introduce these problems in your situation. So just be very cautious about whether you have to introduce these problems into your architecture by going to microservices. Or if not, probably there are well-defined design patterns out there which solve specific problems. Right. So I think there's a few more questions there. So I think so I might answer one more just before winding up, since I think we are just running out of the time. So there's another question asking like, is there any risk coupling with cloud service providers? So in my experience, like there are few risks. For example, if you really don't know about your business domain, and there could be complications like you build for cloud native with cloud provider, but sometimes in terms of the business requirements, they need, maybe for compliance reasons, they might need something to run inside the country. For example, if you take Sri Lanka, if there are government regulations that we need to run this application within the boundary, within the country, then we could get into trouble if we start with cloud native. Other than that, there are some false perceived fears when going to cloud services, like whether is it secure, or is it whether will it be risky, like I won't be able to move to another cloud later on. So these things I see more of false fears, because if you are in a cloud, you actually benefit from all the infrastructure available, where you don't need to put that upfront cost. And in a business, this is very important, right? Because you can operate with very least cost upfront, where you can save that investment if there's a solid reason down the line to move out or do that change. So in that sense, I feel the risk is quite low, unless there's any regulation or regulatory requirements or any other very solid cases where you need to go out from the cloud. Yeah, so I think this, again, the security in terms of cloud, it's not a fear factor, because probably you can't ensure your own data center up to that kind of a compliance level like the cloud does. For example, AWS, if you look at the compliance levels, it's quite solid. You can see PCI DSS, HIPAA standard, like all the other compliances, it's at the top. So probably you can't make your data center to up that level because it's too costly. But AWS does it for you because of the economies of scale they're operating in. So actually the risks are lower in terms of that. But I think the actual risks are basically, you have to think from your business perspective. Can we stay with the cloud? Is there use cases where we have to come out from the cloud? Then you have to figure out whether we have to be cloud neutral or vendor neutral. So yeah, so that's my answer to it. So if you have any other questions, just feel free to send me an email or not. I would be happy to answer after the session. Yeah, with that, so I will conclude my session. And thank you for all the questions and being very proactive.